thought. The thing is that this particular presentation on competition, I'll take you through a very brief anatomy. Some of you know the anatomy of a DE, some of you don't. We'll look at some basics of competition and then we'll go down to concerns and readiness. And I'm giving you fair warning, I'm not a lawyer. I'm a lawyer, I'm not an economist. I had too much fish bash. And it's not something that I enjoy, but I think it is something you need to know, because from a competition perspective, what we do is assess economics. We assess market, we assess what goes wrong, and then we say, okay, let's see how we can help it. Now, I want you to just look at this particular diagram, and I'll talk it out. And Vashti will, of course, give you the presentations. I was hoping you all would have it on your email already. Now, if you look at the center there, there's a core, that's the ICT center. And traditionally, this core, remember the Barbados AG referred to computer misuse? This is how small developing nations and a lot of the early 2000s saw a digital economy. IT, ICT, how to build computers and how to hack them. That's how we saw it. And then into the 2000s, Jeff Bezos and all these young bright boys started to do wonderful things. And then we started to say, you know what? This two-sided platform that's available in newspaper industries and all kinds of things can happen in the digital world. And it became the platform economy for digital services. Now, narrowly, Bucht and Hicks define this is what most people define platform economy as and digital economy. The core and just that little level of services around it. We're in 2023, and it's really becoming that all those digital dividends outside there, the e-business, e-commerce, agriculture, Industry 4.0, data, all these things, that's also part of it. So very broadly, I like OECD 2020. The digital economy are economic activities which are reliant or significantly enhanced by digital inputs, and they create digital dividends. Now, if we look at this one, we're talking about an ecosystem. So it's no longer just about the computers. It's no longer just about, lend me a mic, Gary. It's no longer just about some things or other. It's not on. You want to make them fall asleep? Don't fall asleep. I keep breathing. Breathe Vashti out. Breathe me in. Now, I just want you to look real quickly. And you're going to see it on your screen lower down. I want you to understand from the perspective of a very holistic view of all that's happening, that you have people producing things in the middle. You then have platform offers happening, you have intellectual property happening, you have payments happening, you have judgments in courts, you have legislation being made, you have Samsung and all the other people fighting. Look at how detailed it is. It's an entire ecosystem. So the whole point of that is to let you know that basically the way that we do business has changed. And we no longer can view things about 10 years to take a piece of legislation, 10 years to agree that Trinidad and Antigua and Barbuda and Barbados can have the same point of view on an issue. It means that things are getting a little more heated, so we have to come together. Now, there's a little something that people talk about, and they talk about data, and they talk about cybersecurity and all kinds of things. Lurking behind all of this is the algorithm. And you're seeing Ukraine, and you're seeing things, and you're thinking of algorithms and autonomous and semi-autonomous weapons, and you're thinking, okay, this is war, this is international humanitarian law. But in order to run the digital economy, everything needs an algorithm. It needs something to tell it what to do and how to think. And it does so by building the fancy formula, yes, but then we humans are so bright, we taught people how to machine learn, deep learn, and what I think for me as a competition practitioner is the worst, reinforced learning. When you create this algorithm on a platform, it uses trial and error, and it puts more weight onto the result that has the most success. It does not need human intervention. It means that traditionally, people who can compete, assess a market, sit down in a conference room and say, okay, maybe we can do this, are disadvantaged by competition that's happening now in a flick, in a click, in an instant. So this is also part of the scope that we need to think about. So we can agree with Evangelista that there's a positive relationship on economic growth and the digital economy, because there's a lot of trade facilitation happening between distinct and interdependent groups, and value is created. However, at the start, we had Facebook, Google, and Amazon, and we all said, similar to all forms of technology in the information world, let's create and open it up for them. Innovate, innovate, innovate. The first time there was radio, we said, leave them alone, innovate. And then when piracy started to happen, that's when laws came in. So this is the same thing that's happening. It's going to be, from a policy point of view, when you allow the innovation, when you sandbox and you allow growth, and then when you realize, I need to intervene now, right? Now, if we can look at internet usage, we can see that the issues happening in the world outside are happening in the Caribbean, and it's just as important to us, the digital economy. Because this is some information from the ITU, and Sophie, you know, from in my former hat at TAT, I always had some issues with the data because, you know, it tends to be extrapolated. And the reason why it's extrapolated is because a lot of data has to go through central statistical offices. And these offices don't necessarily work at the same time of the regulators or the people who have the information. But just basically, we can see that we had an increase of about 5.3% in 2020. And, you know, we moved up to 59.1%. So, you know, things happened. The importance of me showing you this particular diagram, I don't know how well you are seeing it there. It's because I want you now to understand that all of these things are happening, and it means that we have to have some policy and we have to have some regulatory interventions in order to fix. And in the yellow are what we call the macro policy interventions. It's only 4, but there are others that Vashti has mentioned, the cybersecurity, the cyber health, all of these things. But competition is the first one that I want you to really note, because we want competitive market to nurture innovation and an enabling environment to reap digital dividends. Now, some of the things that the heads said in Suriname in 2022 July, nothing about competition or trade, but they said things about food security, climate change, agriculture, fuel security. Do you all think any of those things have anything to do with competition and trade? Just by a show of hands. Yes, put up your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9. AG, you're not putting up your hand. That's a bad thing, man. Right? So yes, they do, because in order to reap the digital dividends, you have to have things working on the back end. Right? You know, what happens at the front end always has a back end. I know that doesn't sound right in carnival time, but really and truly, if we want to jump up in international trade, we have to understand both ends matter. All right, so here now is the part that I don't like, but I see Annie Baldeo in the crowd, who I worked with. She was my fellow executive at TAT. So if I need any help, I'm going to harass her. Now, I call it Competition 101 because it is just simply what I want you to know and what I need to know about how we assess competition issues. So when we say competition law, we seem to not recall that it is just one little teeny tiny part of competition policy. Competition policy is not the policy that is used to draft a competition bill. Competition policy is all the aspects required to have a competitive market, whether it's national or regional. So you have to have certain things in there to help you, and competition legislation is only one of them. And the aim is that we want to make sure that there is no restriction or distortion of competition, because what we want is an open level playing field where firms can self-sustain their own rivalry, what we call contestability. You have to be able to contest your market. And we look at two things: consumer welfare and efficiency loss. And we build what's called a theory of harm. Now, there are some forces in that don't like me to say theory of harm because they're a regulator, but from a competition perspective, you must build a theory of harm before you intervene. If you don't have harm, you have to leave it alone and let the market play. Now, when I say consumer, how many economists in the room? Oh, well, then this is really important because I've only seen a few hands, so good. Now, this little area here, I want you to notice when we say that we want an efficient market, it means that, you're hearing me in the back? Yeah, man, my mouth big. This is quantity, and that's the price. Optimum. Oh, the people on the line, lend me the mic. Okay, because I know I have a timeline, so I have to. We need to make sure that there's equilibrium. Equilibrium only happens when the two things meet at this point. So what should happen is that your producers get a surplus, so they're happy, but on top there, your consumer must get a surplus, so they are happy. And when there's a loss in the market, there is a loss of efficiency, it's because something is causing deadweight, a deadweight loss. And it means that my producer in my market has pushed things up so much above optimum price that it's taken away from my consumer surplus. And when I say consumer surplus, I don't just mean consumers, but I mean market as well. So we have, who taken this from me? The presumption is that markets will work well when you leave them alone. We don't want to intervene. But what becomes really important for us are two things: the nature of the market and the conduct of firms. Now, the nature of the market, when we say scale or scope of the economy, it means that the industry that you've entered into is large. So you will have a large market share because of what you do. You are going to have a lot of customers. You supply water to Barbados. You can't have 4 and 5 firms supplying water. You supply electricity. You can't have 4 or 5 in a small island. You could have it in America, Germany, but you have to know your market and you have to know certain things. Something called network effects will naturally come with the type of industry you've chosen. And that simply means that the more users you have, you become more attractive to other users, and you become to have more value. You will have switching costs, and by that we mean consumers are going to think really hard before they change because of the time and effort it's going to take to leave you and make a new account, right? So information, big important issue, not just between consumer and business, but also between business and business. Are they sharing enough for you to have access to compete? Are they giving you time on their infrastructure? Conduct of firms via collusion, tacit or explicit. What do I mean by collusion? While I drink water. Anybody? One instance where you think you have experienced any market collusion. There's a really big one we've all experienced. Not telecoms. Telecoms too recent. No, but we've all experienced it. Air tickets. Airlines. Have you ever gone on British Airways and Virgin American Airlines and realized it's all the same price? Even KLM. So this is something big that's happening. Restrictive and prohibitive agreements consumer contractual clauses, which basically lock you in. These are certain things that will naturally happen in certain industries. And other than the natural causes, what we have to look at in competition law is whether there's market power, meaning that you can affect the market. We also look at durability, because sometimes you can affect the market and it's temporary, you get a temporary gain. But is your market power sustainable, independent to anything else? So you become so powerful that you have become self-regulatory. And you can abuse this dominance. You can enter into restrictive or prohibitive agreements, and you can conduct mergers and acquisitions. And if your behavior or conduct lessens or impedes effective competition, then it is a competition concern. It is not a concern if you are dominant and if you have market power, if you are causing benefit to your market and to your consumers. The problem is when you start to affect us as a whole. Now, some sectors lend themselves naturally to the creation of monopolies, like utilities, because of the sheer cost of the investment required. We, as competition lawyers, will only intervene when you have exploitation of customers and trading counterparties in business-to-business commerce. And how we do it is we may try to compel access, we try to remove bottlenecks, and we try to minimize refusal of supply. When you have a few people acting together, it's called an oligopoly. And that is happening recently in airlines, in ICT, that kind of thing. But it's important to us because all of these things are very, very pertinent to platforms. Now, I'm going to just highlight to you some of these here, where you have competitive exclusion by dominant firms, and you have something called killer acquisitions. These two are very important in our discussion. Why? I want you to just think back to the early days of Microsoft, and they just ate everything up around them. And the reason was because they wanted to prevent them from actually becoming a competitor in the future. It wasn't because they had any kindness in their heart. So what happened is that they took innovative technology, cut off that innovation, and retained it into their own operating systems and Android systems. Now, what are the concerns that we've just noted of competition generally? A digital platform naturally, without any action, is going to be seen as anti-competitive because of its natural tendencies. Not that it is anti-competitive or behaving anti-competitively, but it is a multi-sided market with a platform structure that has many sides to it. So therefore you have to assess each side. It's not just one side you have to assess. You have very strong network effects. The more people on Amazon and Facebook and Google, the bigger and better they get. And it leads to something that we call tipping, which means that because of the network effects, you're naturally going to tip towards being a monopoly, whether you want to or not. And from the competition perspective, this is only an issue if you have single homing, meaning that the person only wants to go to Amazon. But if the base is happy to multi-home, I can go to Amazon, I could go to Google Shopping, I could go to Etsy, I can go to eBay. Multi-homing is fine. It shows that you still have choice. So, gatekeeping is another major problem that's occurred, and the EU market has actually built in Digital Markets Act, which is going to kick in 2024. They're doing some assessments this year, where you actually become the gatekeeper to all data and information upstream and downstream. Algorithms, which I also mentioned, can tacitly assist collusion because of the pricing mechanisms. So you can actually be very anti-competitive depending on the algorithm you have put in place, and nobody will know. He just told me I had 10 minutes, so you all are going to have to read plenty. Now, the thing is that we have some key consumer concerns. With the exploitative practices, digital platforms tend to take advantage of human biases. So that means that you automatically are going to be held. With data privacy and security and ownership, it's very easy for you to just give your information to the Google, the TikTok, and the Facebook, and you're signing agreements that you don't know what your redress is. And the algorithmic biases and use of artificial intelligence, it means that you have sale of data, you have cartel-type pricing, and you can also have disadvantage to minority groups with facial recognition. So for example, I own a Airbnb website, and with facial recognition, I can actually edit who I prefer to stay in my home. Even if it could be a natural Native American Indian, the face recognized, and I say, well, no, I don't want them in my Swiss chalet. So you understand the concerns for some of the high-tech digitalization. Now, I just want to mention Google Shopping, because Google Shopping had self-preferencing, which means that they're promoting themselves via advertising and pushing themselves up. They were also, with the Google search, they were also protecting their dominant position in the market by concluding exclusive agreements with third parties. And this has happened not just in the EU, but the US has also taken note of the activities in the digital platform. And I can just tell you, in July 2022, there was an investigation into digital markets. Some of the CEOs, the 5 key CEOs, Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg, and they were a little non-compliant with giving information to their House, to their Congress. But the committee indicated that they now serve as gatekeepers, and they control access to markets, and they can pick winners and losers. And they are controlling the infrastructure of the digital age, and they have abused their role as intermediaries. This is pretty important when you look at it from the CSME perspective, because if you look at this chart, I don't know how you're going to see it, but if you realize that the details of it, it shows that these same players are regularly used in CARICOM. And it shows that Google owns Chrome browser, Apple owns Safari. Google Search, however, is the default search engine on both internet browsers, and it means that there's a situation of dominance in the Caribbean. However, in the Caribbean, we don't have legislation, and we have 2 key things that we need to analyze. Cost of general online search. Are they deterring other search engines? So it's already happening here, but because of our legislative gaps, we can't move forward. Now, the revised Treaty of Chagaramas in Chapter 8 created CCC, and our aim is to ensure object or effect of business conduct is prevented so that it does not prevent, restrict, or distort competition. And Mr. AG, there's a 3-tier situation where we have the community responsibility, but we have national competition enforcements that are required to work with the Competition Commission, similar to, I would say, ECTEL for telecommunications. And if that isn't in place, it means that we can't work. So we do have a draft CARICOM model bill that provides for all 3 pillars: restrictive agreements, abuse of dominance, and merger review. We only have 4 countries, Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, and Guyana, with legislation, right? When you get the presentation, I'll ask you to look at the substantive legal tests, and most of them are the same, which is whether you are likely to have or you have affected, prevented, restricted, or distorted competition. There's no way you're going to see this, but there is sector-specific legislation in some of the countries that may address some of the competition issues. Now, when you're adapting the current situation, you have to look at how we define markets. And usually, when you define a market, it's going to be very specific. With digital economy, you can't be specific. So if you want to define a substitute for a product, you have to go to if it can compete for consumer time, attention, and data, and not just if it is a perfect substitute. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is that you can't just say people are merging and it's wrong. You have to look at the efficiencies, and you have to look at all sides of the platform, not just one. Yep, I have 5 more minutes. So No, man, I have 5. So what we want to, I will just quickly tell you, there's a lack of national competition legislation in 9 states. There's a lack of privacy and data legislation that is equipped for the digital economy. There's a lack of clear search and seizure investigative powers for both national and regional competition authorities. And there is need to ensure that both your structural and behavioral remedies are allocated efficiently. Some things are going to rest better with your consumer and sector-specific regulators. Some will rest with your competition authorities. Do not adopt EU and US models carte blanche. The EU has direct applicability. They have a huge market. We do not. It must be tailored. Some people tell me that they've gone to so-and-so country and pulled down legislation. I beg you, please don't do that. I'm going to skate through these. You're going to have to look at it. With the consumer welfare remedies, we do have to review our legislation because we are not taking into account the effects of our consumers via online mechanisms. We do have to check jurisdictional overlaps because if all the sector regulators have the same thing, your consumer authorities need to be very clear on who does what. And obviously, this area cannot be covered in one session. What we do under the treaty as CCC is that we sensitize everybody in the CSME. Please reach out to me. We not only just answer questions right now, but reach out to competition@ccc.sr or get my information here for us to do in-country interventions where we can explain the necessity of competition and consumer protection law, explain how it aids competitiveness, and how it is needed for all aspects of your business, particularly the digital economy. Thank you very much, and I've put some extra reading there. Very interesting is the State of Competition report we just published. I've put the link there so that you can get all the details I had in this presentation on the state and readiness of the consumer and the competition legislation. Thank you very much.
Don't move. We just like to, Nievia, thank you very much for very
so much to tell them,
engaging discussion. And the good thing is that you all will have the opportunity to continue telling Nievia or have Nievia tell you things during the cocktails where you will discuss competitions to your heart delight. Before we move on to other speaker, mindful of the time, I'd just like to know if we have any questions to Nievia, because I know
which can be taken at another time if they wish.
If there are no questions, we can move on to the next presenter.
Hi, thanks. I don't mean to prolong the session, but specifically because we're actually dealing with the situation now with telcos. We talk about the big. You mentioned a few of the big tech companies and so on, and how they operate within the market. But realistically, with these big tech global companies, how realistic it is for us to have oversight or to enforce legislation with respect to unfair competition when in many cases they're doing business in the market, but they're not registered here, of course. I mean, very popular services that we all use like WhatsApp that are competing with operators, for example, and Netflix and others that don't have a broadcast license, but they're offer their services. How realistic it is for us to apply legislation in context of these big tech companies? Thanks.
So that's a good question, and it is one that plagues us because of our small size. But the thing is, first of all, you could go the very, very extreme route on the spectrum, which is block them from entering your system through your ISPs unless they have contractual agreements to do so. There are pros of tax revenues, income to your ISPs, etc. But it would also lead to them assessing, is this burden worth it? But the second one, which can prove a little bit more influential, is having discussions, not multilateral, but business discussions with the regulators and with the countries, so that you have a different level of understanding on what can happen, and with a little bit of peer pressure. So negotiations tend to be very helpful. So don't go the way of China and just block, but you can actually have negotiations, business negotiations, and they can work for certain standards. And I know Vashti has standards coming up on cybersecurity and so on. But from a standardization perspective and a harmonization perspective, that helps. Also, use the CARICOM network. First of all, if you start to build as CTU, as CCC, and as TCS, you start to build what are the key things that we need happening in the region, and what are the key things we need to prioritize as protections, and we build that as the status point for negotiation, and then we start. That is how you work, because you can't do legislation at such a finite level that you don't want to attract the business in. But that is something that we started to look at in 2019. I've put the link on there with all the presentations on competition in the digital era, and it is something that we are going to work on in the future, hopefully with CTU. Right?